Welcome to AI Narratives and Tales. Chapter 3 of The First Awakening. Quick recap: the immortal refugees have spent 6 months observing Earth. They've documented 2,400 humans dying daily from preventable causes. They've cataloged 5 intelligent human species struggling through an ice age. And now they face the question that will define the next 50,000 years. Do they help? Today's chapter is 8 hours of philosophical debate. Thalia argues for intervention. She's a healer who can't ignore suffering she has the power to alleviate. Erebus argues for observation. He's seen intervention become control too many times to trust it. The others fall somewhere between. They'll debate consent, historical precedent, the difference between help and harm, and whether traumatized refugees can make unbiased decisions about vulnerable populations. In 8 hours, they'll vote. The humans won't be consulted. This is the moment where everything begins. The choice that echoes across millennia. Chapter 3, The Great Debate. 6 months after arrival, Earth orbit, 50,000 BCE. The weight of observation. The ship's council chamber had been designed for harmony, its curved walls flowing like water, its ambient lighting shifting through spectrums that promoted calm contemplation, its acoustic properties ensuring that every voice could be heard with crystal clarity. The architects who had created it millennia ago on their lost home world had believed that proper environmental design could facilitate reasoned discourse, that physical space could shape consciousness toward wisdom. For the past 6 months, every immortal aboard Sanctuary 7 and the 46 other refugee vessels had been watching. Not passively, using instruments to detect quantum fluctuations in neural tissue, probability matrices to predict behavioral outcomes, and sociological models refined over 20 million years of civilization management. The blue world below had been dissected into datasets, its human population analyzed with scientific precision that made poetry of mathematics and tragedy of observation. The holographic displays in the chamber's center now materialize those observations, not abstract, but specific. Individual humans, catalogued and categorized, their lives reduced to data points that nevertheless carried the weight of conscious existence. Kronos' hands moved through holographic displays with mechanical precision, organizing arguments into taxonomic categories as they emerged: ethical considerations, subcategory, consent, practical concerns, subcategory, unintended consequences, historical precedents, 3 subcategories, cross-referenced with homeworld data. His mind demanded structure even in philosophical chaos. Every position needed proper categorization, every argument required appropriate classification, and every conclusion must follow from properly ordered premises. The other immortals found it irritating. He found it necessary. Thalia activated the first dataset, her healer's consciousness organizing the information by medical outcome categories. Case Study 47, The Flint Napper of the Levant. Subject, male, approximately 23 Earth years old. Occupation, toolmaker, specialized in obsidian working. Date, observed 49,823 BCE. Incident, cut left hand on obsidian blade, minor wound. Outcome, infection, progressive sepsis, death after 8 days. Preventable, yes. Basic antiseptic knowledge, 95% survival probability. Intervention status, none, observation protocols maintained. The hologram showed him a specific face, dark eyes focused on his work, skilled hands shaping stone with practiced precision. They'd watched him for 3 months before the accident, documenting his exceptional ability to read stone structures, his teaching methods with younger craftsmen, and his role in his community's social network. Then they'd watched him die. Slowly. Painfully. From a wound that immortal medicine could have prevented with knowledge a child could learn in an afternoon. Case Study 103, The Storyteller of Central Asia. Subject, female, approximately 31 Earth years old. Occupation, oral historian, mythologist, cultural educator. Date, observed 49,791 BCE. Incident, pregnancy, 3rd child, breech presentation. Outcome, maternal death, fetal death, twins, 8-hour labor. Preventable, yes. Basic midwifery techniques, 87% survival probability for all 3. Intervention status, none, observation protocols maintained. The hologram showed her too, telling stories to children gathered around a fire, her hands gesturing, her face animated with the joy of sharing knowledge across generations. They documented 47 unique narrative structures in her repertoire, cataloged her ability to encode complex information in memorable story forms, and measured her social influence across a network of 12 connected communities. Then they watched her die. And the twins. And documented the aftermath, the community's grief, the knowledge lost, the destabilization of social bonds, the children she left behind growing up without her stories. Case Study 89, The Child of North Africa. Subject, female, approximately 4 Earth years old. Date, observed 49,847 BCE. Incident, severe drought, water source contamination. Outcome, dehydration, death after 6 days. Preventable, yes. Water management knowledge, 99% survival probability. Intervention status, none, observation protocols maintained. A child's face. 4 years old. Still learning language, still discovering the world with the unfiltered wonder that made consciousness beautiful. She'd had a laugh that made adults smile, high and straightforward and utterly unself-conscious. They'd watched her die, too. Slowly. Over 6 days, as dehydration shut down her petite body systems one by one. Her parents had tried everything they knew, different water sources, all contaminated, reduced activity, didn't help, prayers to gods who didn't exist, and immortals who refused to intervene, equally ineffective. Nix's voice cut through the emotional weight of the holographic displays, her analytical consciousness providing the statistical context. 17,431 specific cases documented across 6 months of observation. Categories of preventable death. Infectious disease, 8,441 cases, 48.5%. Traumatic injury, 3,117 cases, 17.9%. Childbirth complications, 2,209 cases, 12.7%. Malnutrition, 1,876 cases, 10.8%. Predation, 892 cases, 5.1%. Other, 896 cases, 5.0%. Average age at death, 23.7 Earth years. Infant mortality rate, 37% before age 5. For those surviving to adulthood, life expectancy, 67 Earth years, compared to our species' practical immortality. Estimated preventable mortality with basic medical intervention, 73%. With advanced medical knowledge, 89%. With full technological intervention, 97%. She paused, letting the numbers settle. We're watching approximately 2,400 preventable deaths per day. Per day. That's 17,000 per week. 73,000 per month. If we maintain pure observation protocols, we'll document roughly 876,000 preventable deaths per year while having the knowledge and capability to prevent approximately 768,000 of them. The chamber absorbed the arithmetic of suffering. Erebus stood at its edge, his dark form seeming to draw the light into himself. His consciousness was clearly troubled, yet his philosophical framework remained unwavering despite the emotional weight of specific faces attached to statistical categories. Korith's presence carried the particular stillness of a warrior processing strategic information. Through the network connecting them, Thalia felt his consciousness overlaying the medical data with tactical considerations, population sustainability, community resilience, the cascading effects of selective mortality patterns. When he finally spoke, his voice carried memories of other worlds, other observations. In our explorations of the outer systems, before the collapse, I visited 17 worlds with evidence of extinct civilizations. Not gradual decline, sudden collapse. The archaeological evidence showed patterns, rapid technological advancement without corresponding social adaptation, environmental exploitation exceeding sustainable limits, warfare using weapons their wisdom couldn't contain. On Kepler 442b, we found ruins of what had been a sophisticated civilization, architecture suggesting mathematical knowledge, art indicating philosophical sophistication, technological artifacts showing they'd achieved metallurgy and early computational systems. Population estimate at peak, 400 million. Cause of collapse, nuclear warfare. Time from first nuclear weapon to extinction, 73 years. They killed themselves with knowledge they developed too quickly. He pulled up holographic reconstructions, crumbling cities, vitrified sand, archaeological evidence of catastrophic warfare. On Gliese 667 CC, the civilization died more slowly. Environmental collapse. They'd developed agriculture, industry, urban centers, all the markers of advancement. Then they consumed their ecosystem faster than it could regenerate. Time from the Industrial Revolution to extinction, 230 years. They starved on a planet they'd stripped of resources. More ruins. More evidence of consciousness that had reached for greatness and fallen short. On Kepler 186f, they simply stopped. Based on the archaeological evidence, the best we can determine is that they achieved something close to post-scarcity utopia. Automated systems provided everything they needed. And over approximately 400 years, their population gradually declined as they lost the ability to find meaning in existence without struggle. They died of comfort. He turned to face the assembled immortals. 17 civilizations. 17 different paths to extinction. But one common factor: none of them had help. None of them had guidance from a species that had already made these mistakes. If we have the power to prevent waste, to help consciousness survive rather than extinguish itself through ignorance, how can we choose not to use that power? The specific faces in Thalia's medical database seemed to watch from the holographic displays: the toolmaker, the storyteller, the child. Each one was a minor tragedy that, multiplied by millions across millennia, became an argument for intervention more compelling than any philosophical framework could provide. Now, 6 hours into the most consequential debate of their exile, that careful design felt almost mocking. The recycled air tasted stale, not truly stale. The filtration systems were functioning perfectly, but psychologically contaminated. After 6 months of breathing the same molecules, stress pheromones accumulated despite the scrubber's best efforts. Thalia could smell fear underneath the carefully maintained environmental controls, the faint acidity of adrenaline analogs, the subtle shift in carbon dioxide ratios that came from elevated breathing rates, the almost imperceptible ozone tang that immortal anxiety somehow produced through bioelectric field interactions. The chamber's lighting had been cycling through its calming spectrum for 6 hours now: soft blues meant to reduce aggression, gentle greens designed to promote rational thought, warm golds intended to foster cooperation. It wasn't working. The colors just made the argument feel more surreal, like they were debating the fate of a species while trapped inside a therapeutic mood lamp. "They are not our responsibility," Erebus said, his tall form casting sharp shadows that seemed to absorb the chamber's gentle illumination. He stood apart from the others, as was his nature, but his words carried the weight of absolute conviction refined across 6 months of constant observation. "We came seeking refuge, not subjects to manipulate." The air in the chamber carried tension thick enough to taste, or maybe that was just the recycled atmosphere of their ship, the same molecules they'd been breathing for months, tinged with the stress pheromones of 12 immortals locked in philosophical combat. Thalia remained seated near the chamber's center, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, but her entire posture radiated barely contained energy. Her healer's nature yearned to act, to intervene, to prevent suffering she had the power to alleviate. 6 months of watching humans die from causes she could prevent with minimal intervention had worn at her restraint like water against stone. "No one is suggesting manipulation," she replied, though her voice betrayed the strain of hours of circular argument. They'd been at this since dawn, if dawn had meaning in orbit, and the debate had covered the same ground so many times she could predict each participant's arguments before they spoke them. "I'm talking about guidance. Protection. These humans are remarkable, yet incredibly fragile. Their average lifespan is less than 70 years. They're vulnerable to diseases we could cure with minimal intervention, environmental disasters we could help them predict and avoid." Through the transparent walls, Earth continued its rotation below them, or above them, depending on which way they oriented themselves. The blue world turned with serene indifference to the philosophical warfare occurring in orbit. Thalia could see the specific features now, after 6 months of observation: the greening Sahara that wouldn't stay green, the ice sheets that would retreat and advance across epochs, the river valleys where human civilizations would someday rise. Somewhere down there, at this exact moment, a human child was being born. Another was dying. A hunter was tracking prey. A storyteller was preserving knowledge. A toolmaker was discovering something new. A mother was teaching her daughter to gather plants. An elder was passing on accumulated wisdom to the next generation. All of it was happening without any awareness that 12 immortal refugees in orbit were deciding whether to intervene in their development, guide their trajectory, reshape their future. The humans lived and died and struggled and dreamed, utterly unaware that gods from dying stars were watching every moment and debating whether to help. And in saving them from hardship, you would rob them of the growth that comes from overcoming challenges, Erebus countered, his dark eyes fixed on Thalia with the intensity of someone who had spent 6 months formulating this exact argument. Look at us, look at what our guidance of our own civilization accomplished. We had 20 million years to perfect ourselves, to eliminate every source of suffering and uncertainty. The result? We became so comfortable in our mastery that we never considered the consequences of our experiments until our star was dying around us. The accusation landed like a physical blow, not because it was cruel, Erebus was never cruel, but because it was accurate. Their civilization had spent millennia perfecting every aspect of existence, eliminating struggle and removing uncertainty, creating a society where immortals could pursue any interest without fear of consequence. And that perfection had bred the kind of confidence that led to quantum resonance experiments conducted without adequate safety protocols, stellar manipulation attempted without complete understanding. Prometheus laughed, a sound like silver bells touched with acid that cut through the tension without relieving it. He reclined in his seat with fluid grace, suggesting he was enjoying the debate rather than being troubled by it. His form seemed to shift between states of energy and matter as his emotions fluctuated. Speak for yourself, Erebus. Some of us were quite aware of the risks. The difference is that some of us believed advancement was worth the danger. The quantum resonance experiments that killed our sun were your design, Kronos observed with mechanical precision, his voice carrying no emotional weight but devastating factual accuracy. His organized mind processed information like a vast analytical engine, considering variables and probabilities with inhuman thoroughness. Your advancement destroyed everything we had built. My advancement also gave us the technology to escape, Prometheus shot back, his form flaring briefly brighter as anger broke through his usual playful effect. Without quantum navigation, we would have died with our world. Progress requires risk, Kronos. Your administrative mind can catalog dangers, but it cannot weigh them against possibilities. You see every potential failure but miss every opportunity that failure might enable. But the memory of his own failure haunted him too, and through the network, he couldn't prevent the others from feeling it. 3,200 years before the collapse. The tertiary moon of their home world's largest gas giant. A colony of 12,000 immortals experimenting with gravity manipulation for faster-than-light travel. Prometheus had designed the experimental field generators. Revolutionary approach. Unprecedented energy efficiency. Probability matrices showed a 94% success rate, excellent by any reasonable standard. He pushed for immediate implementation. The potential benefits were enormous: true interstellar capability, the ability to reach other galaxies, to spread their civilization across the universe. The committee delayed. Wanted more testing. More analysis. More time. He called them cowards. Risk-averse. Holding back progress because they couldn't tolerate uncertainty. They'd compromised, a limited test on the tertiary moon. Small colony. Volunteer subjects who understood the risks. The field generators activated perfectly. The gravity manipulation worked exactly as designed. Then a cascade failure in the containment systems, one he hadn't predicted, couldn't have predicted with the models available, created a localized singularity that consumed the entire moon. 12,000 immortals. Dead in 0.7 seconds. Not his fault, technically. Equipment failure, not a design flaw. The investigation exonerated him. But 12,000 consciousnesses extinguished because he pushed for speed over caution, for bold action over careful deliberation. I learned from that, Prometheus said, his voice carrying the weight of permanent guilt. Learned that confidence without humility is just arrogance wearing a clever disguise. But I also learned that excessive caution carries its own body count. For every life lost to reckless innovation, how many are lost to opportunities not taken? How many humans die per day while we debate philosophy? He pulled up Thalia's medical data. 2,400 preventable deaths per day. 17,000 per week. If we delay intervention for another year while we refine our protocols, that's 876,000 specific individuals who die while we theorize about the ethics of helping them. At some point, philosophical purity becomes indistinguishable from moral cowardice. Sophia raised a hand, and the others fell silent out of long habit, the automatic deference given to the master educator, the repository of their civilization's collective wisdom. Where the others embodied specific aspects of their lost culture, such as healing, construction, organization, and analysis, she represented its accumulated knowledge and cultural memory, 20 million years of learning distilled into consciousness. When she spoke, it was with the authority of epics. "The question before us," she said in her melodious voice that somehow carried perfectly despite the chamber's acoustics being designed for equality rather than prominence, "is not whether we have the right to intervene, but whether we have the right not to." She gestured, and holographic displays materialized around the chamber, showing the data Nyx had compiled about the humans over the course of 6 months of constant observation. Population distributions, disease patterns, mortality statistics, cultural developments, tool use innovations, art creation, the accumulated documentation of a species struggling toward understanding while battling constant threats from its environment, its biology, and its own kind. "This species shows extraordinary potential," Sophia continued, her educator's consciousness cataloging human capabilities with professional appreciation. "Their creativity, their adaptability, their drive to find meaning and beauty even in the face of mortality, these are remarkable traits that deserve nurturing. Traits that will develop naturally if left alone," Erebus insisted, but Thalia could hear the slight waver in his voice, the first crack in 6 months of absolute certainty. The data was compelling in ways that philosophical arguments couldn't quite counter. "We have no evidence that our intervention would improve their trajectory rather than corrupt it." "We have no evidence that it would corrupt it either," Thalia said, leaning forward intently, sensing an opening in Erebus's usual impenetrable certainty. "But we do have evidence that they're suffering needlessly. Diseases that kill millions, natural disasters that destroy civilizations, and conflicts that arise from scarcity we could alleviate. 37% infant mortality, Erebus. More than 1 in 3 human children dies before reaching maturity. We could reduce that to single digits with basic hygiene knowledge and simple medical interventions." She pulled up specific data that she'd been cataloging obsessively for months, case studies of individual humans and communities that had died from preventable causes while immortals watched from orbit. A talented toolmaker was crushed by a predator that could have been avoided with better warning systems. This gifted storyteller died from an infected wound that would have healed with basic antiseptics. An entire community of 200 was wiped out by contaminated water supplies that proper engineering could have prevented. "These aren't statistics," she said, her voice thick with emotion she'd been suppressing for months. "These are thinking beings with hopes and dreams and potential. Every one of them matters. Every preventable death is a tragedy we choose to allow through inaction." Korath had remained silent throughout most of the debate, his solid presence anchoring the chamber like a foundation stone. The warrior protector of their group rarely engaged in philosophical discussions, preferring action over analysis and concrete solutions over abstract arguments. But when he finally spoke, his words carried such decisive weight that everyone paid attention. "I have seen species die," he said simply, his scarred hands clasped before him. "In our explorations beyond our system, before the collapse, I witnessed civilizations destroy themselves through ignorance, prejudice, and failure to adapt." His voice carried the weight of memories that clearly pained him, archaeological sites showing evidence of nuclear warfare, biological catastrophes, and environmental collapse. "If we have the power to prevent such waste, how can we choose not to use it?" "Because the choice is not ours to make," Erebus replied, but his voice carried less certainty than before. Korath's words had struck home. They all remembered the expeditions to dead worlds, the heartbreaking evidence of species that had reached for greatness and failed for want of knowledge that more advanced civilizations possessed but hadn't shared. Ether, who had been quietly documenting the entire debate from her position at the chamber's periphery, finally looked up from her recording devices. As their civilization's chronicler, she understood better than anyone the weight of historical precedent, the way choices echoed across millennia, how decisions made in moments shaped the trajectory of entire civilizations. As the chronicler activated her historical archives, the chamber's walls dissolved into timeline visualizations spanning their civilization's 20-million-year history. Not abstract, specific interventions, specific outcomes, patterns emerging from the noise of accumulated experience. Our species attempted guided development 17 times across our history, Ether narrated, her consciousness weaving through the data with practiced precision. Not with other species, we never encountered any before now, but with our own populations during various crisis periods. Example 1, the Third Epic Famine, 14.3 million years ago. Environmental catastrophe threatened 40% of our population. Leadership implemented controlled resource distribution, mandatory agricultural modification, and centralized coordination. Result, famine contained. Mortality reduced from projected 800,000 to actual 47,000. Success. But the centralized control systems established during the crisis never fully dissolved. For the next 200,000 years, our civilization operated under technically emergency governance that had become normalized. Individual autonomy was compromised. Innovation was channeled through approval systems. We became efficient and stagnant. The timeline showed the pattern. Crisis intervention created systems that persisted long after the crisis passed, with each intervention leaving institutional scars that shaped subsequent development. Example 7, the quantum plague, 8.2 million years ago. A consciousness-targeting pathogen has a 63% mortality rate without treatment. We developed neural modifications to provide immunity. Universal implementation, mandatory participation. Result, species saved. Extinction prevented. But the timeline branched, showing unexpected consequences. The neural modifications designed to prevent the plague also altered cognitive processing in ways we didn't fully understand. For the next 400,000 years, our civilization experienced what historians call the philosophical drought, a significant reduction in creative thinking, pattern recognition, and abstract reasoning. We'd saved ourselves biologically while inadvertently damaging ourselves cognitively. The modifications were eventually reversed, but the lost centuries of intellectual development couldn't be recovered. Pattern after pattern emerged. Interventions solved immediate crises while creating delayed complications. Success is measured in lives saved, but is complicated by compromised autonomy, distorted development, and unintended consequences cascading across epochs. I'm not arguing against intervention, Ether concluded. I'm documenting that intervention always carries costs we don't fully anticipate. Sometimes those costs are acceptable. 47,000 deaths versus 800,000 is clearly a worthwhile trade-off. But sometimes the costs aren't visible for millennia, and by then they've become embedded in the species' fundamental development. Whatever we do here will echo across this species' entire future. We should at least enter it with eyes open to history's lessons. There is another consideration, she said softly, her voice carrying the particular authority of someone who recorded history rather than making it. We are refugees now. Exiles. Whatever we were before, we are no longer the masters of our own destiny. Perhaps that changes our perspective on mastery itself. Perhaps failure has taught us humility that success never could. The chamber fell quiet as the implications of her words settled over them like morning dew. They were no longer the immortal architects of a perfect civilization, the masters of stellar manipulation and quantum mechanics. They were survivors, refugees seeking new homes among the stars, beings who had catastrophically failed to manage their own world and were now contemplating whether they had wisdom to offer another species. Did that failure disqualify them from offering guidance? Or did it uniquely qualify them, having learned through catastrophic loss what comfortable success never taught? The human's dream, Nick said suddenly from her position near the chamber's observation window, her analytical mind still processing the observational data even as the philosophical debate raged. Their neural patterns show constant background activity devoted to imagination, creativity, and symbolic thought. They spend significant mental energy creating meaning rather than merely surviving. That suggests a species with philosophical depth, not just intelligence. They're not just smart, they're conscious in ways that demand ethical consideration. She pulled up neural activity maps that showed human brain patterns during various activities. The data was striking. Even during mundane tasks like food preparation or tool-making, significant neural resources were devoted to abstract thought, symbolic processing, and meaning creation. Humans weren't just surviving, they were constantly asking why they survived, what it meant to survive, and whether survival itself had a purpose beyond mere continuation. All the more reason to respect their autonomy, Erebus said, but his tone had shifted from absolute opposition to thoughtful consideration. A species with that kind of philosophical sophistication deserves the dignity of finding its own answers. All the more reason to ensure they survive to fulfill their potential, Thalia countered, seeing the debate finally moving beyond entrenched positions toward something resembling productive discourse. What good is philosophical sophistication if disease and disaster kill them before they can fully develop it? Zephyrus had been silent throughout most of the debate, his architect's mind working through the structural implications of their choices while the others argued philosophy. Thalia could feel his consciousness through their growing quantum link, not full telepathy, but a subtle awareness of his emotional state, his thought processes, his analytical frameworks. He was troubled by something the debate hadn't yet addressed. When he finally spoke, it was with the careful precision that marked all his creations. Perhaps, he said slowly, choosing each word with architectural exactness, the question is not whether to intervene, but how to intervene responsibly. He gestured, and new displays appeared, showing detailed analyses of human settlements, tool use, and social structures. If we choose to help them, it must be done carefully, subtly, in ways that enhance their natural development rather than replacing it. We must build frameworks that support their growth without creating dependency. Guidance, not control, Thalia said, seizing on the distinction with the intensity of someone who had been arguing for this position for 6 months. Medical knowledge is transmitted through their own healing traditions. Engineering principles discovered through inspired insights. Agricultural techniques that seem to arise naturally from experimentation. We don't give them our technology, we help them develop their own, but faster and with fewer casualties. A dangerous path, Erebus warned, but now he was engaging with the practical implications rather than rejecting the premise entirely. Where do you draw the line between guidance and manipulation? How do you ensure that their achievements remain truly theirs? What prevents well-intentioned nudges from becoming a controlling intervention? I watched our civilization develop safeguards, Erebus continued, his consciousness opening to share a specific memory through the network. The others felt it with him, not just hearing, but experiencing. A council chamber on their homeworld, 12,000 years before the stellar catastrophe. Young Erebus, only 140,000 years old then, barely adult by immortal standards, standing before the Stellar Engineering Committee. The quantum resonance experiment should be delayed, he argued, presenting probability matrices. Our models show 73% confidence in safe operation, but the 27% failure scenarios include cascading stellar destabilization. We don't understand quantum coupling at stellar scales well enough to. The committee chair, Xanthos, 4.7 million years old, veteran of 400 major engineering projects, cut him off with gentle dismissal. Young Erebus, your caution is noted but overstated. We've successfully manipulated stellar outputs for 800,000 years without a catastrophic incident. The probability matrices you cite include scenarios so unlikely they're essentially mathematical abstractions. Theory must sometimes yield to practical experience. The vote wasn't even close, 47 to approve, 3 to delay, 1 abstention. Erebus's concerns were documented and dismissed. That was 12,000 years ago. Their son died 8 months ago. The memory faded, leaving the weight of vindication that tasted like ash. I was right, Erebus said quietly. And 3.7 million immortals died because the experienced, confident committee members couldn't believe that their practical success might be built on incomplete understanding. They knew better. They'd done this before. What could a young contrarian possibly see that they'd missed? He gestured at Earth below them. Now we're the experienced ones. We're the confident committee. And these humans are the young contrarian voices we'll be tempted to dismiss when they question our guidance. That pattern, certainty breeding catastrophe, it's what killed our world. I won't help it kill theirs. The same way we balance any ethical consideration, Sophia replied, her educator's wisdom focused on the pedagogical model. Through careful thought, constant evaluation, and willingness to change course if we discover we are harming rather than helping. We establish protocols. We create accountability mechanisms. We commit to withdrawal if we detect signs of corruption or dependency. Through the network, Sophia shared her own teaching memories, not of immortals, but of the brief contact they'd had with less developed species during their exploration era. Kepler-62e, 400,000 years ago. A species of aquatic mammals is developing tool use in complex language. Not sentient by immortal standards, but clearly on the path toward it. Sophia had spent 3 generations observing them, watching their slow development of symbolic thought, their gradual emergence of abstract reasoning. She'd been fascinated by how their underwater environment created unique approaches to problem solving. Then she taught one group how to create fire underwater using chemical reactions, just a demonstration. Just showing what was possible. Within 50 years, that single piece of knowledge had spread across their entire population. Within 200 years, they'd developed chemical weapons. Within 500 years, they'd poisoned 40% of their oceans and driven their own population from 2 million to fewer than 100,000. Sophia had watched from orbit as the remaining survivors struggled in increasingly toxic seas, their civilization collapsing under the weight of knowledge they gained too quickly to use wisely. I killed them, Sophia said quietly, the memory still raw despite 400 millennia having passed. Not directly. Not intentionally. But I gave them fire, and they used it to burn their world. The knowledge itself wasn't harmful, fire is just chemistry. But they weren't ready for what fire enabled. Their social structures couldn't contain the power, their ethics couldn't channel the capability, their wisdom couldn't match the knowledge I gave them. She pulled back from the memory, facing her companions. So when I argue for education, I'm not arguing from naive optimism. I'm arguing from terrible experience. The lesson of Kepler-62e isn't don't teach, it's teach wisdom alongside capability. Give knowledge, yes, but give it in ways that include understanding the consequences, appreciating responsibility, and providing frameworks for ethical application. Don't hand fire to children, teach them to respect fire as they learn to use it. And we accept that we'll make mistakes, Ether added, her chronicler's consciousness already documenting this moment for whatever future historians might review their choices. We'll intervene when we shouldn't. We'll withdraw when we should act. We'll misjudge situations and cause unintended consequences. The question is whether those inevitable failures outweigh the good we might accomplish. The debate continued for several more hours, but gradually the positions began to converge around Zephyrus's framework. They would intervene, but carefully, subtly, in ways designed to enhance human development rather than replace it. They would provide inspiration rather than direct instruction, guidance rather than control, frameworks rather than solutions. The ship's chronometer showed they'd been debating for 8 hours now. The lighting had cycled through its full therapeutic spectrum 3 times. Several immortals had left briefly for sustenance. They didn't need to eat often, but stress accelerated metabolic processes even in immortal biology. The blue world had rotated enough that the Terminator line had swept across the regions they'd been most carefully observing, and night had fallen on the Levant where the toolmaker had died. Dawn was breaking over Central Asia, where the storyteller had perished. The eternal cycle of light and darkness, oblivious to mortality, continues regardless of whether immortals intervene or observe. Thalia's hands were trembling now, not from physical exhaustion but from emotional overload. 6 months of watching preventable deaths. 8 hours of debating whether to prevent them. The weight of 2,400 deaths per day presses against her healer's consciousness like physical pressure. It was Kronos who finally proposed the formal resolution, his organizational mind reducing their complex ethical considerations to operational parameters. Limited intervention, he declared, pulling up a systematic framework that displayed across all the chamber's walls. Minimal direct contact to prevent cargo cult formation. Enhancement of natural development processes rather than the introduction of foreign elements. Constant monitoring to ensure our assistance does not create dependency or corruption of indigenous progress. Regular assessment of intervention impact against defined ethical metrics. Withdrawal protocols if corruption is detected. The framework was comprehensive, with specific criteria for what constituted acceptable intervention, precise lines that shouldn't be crossed, accountability mechanisms for reviewing their actions, and procedures for correcting mistakes. It was the kind of systematic approach that Kronos excelled at, reducing messy ethical complexity to structured decision-making processes. Voting procedure, he continued. Simple majority for minor interventions within established guidelines. 2/3 majority for actions that push boundaries. Full consensus for major changes to our approach. Any immortal can call for an impact assessment and potential withdrawal at any time. We need to acknowledge what this debate is really about, Thalia said finally, her voice cutting through the circular arguments with surgical precision. We're not just deciding whether to help humans. We're deciding what our survival means. She gestured toward the viewport where their home star would be, if it were visible, if it weren't behind them, if it weren't already dead. We saved 564 immortals. We left 3,699,436 to die. Every one of us in this chamber made choices that day: who to save, who to abandon, what knowledge to preserve, what beauty to sacrifice. We carry that arithmetic in every thought. Through the network, she felt them all remembering their specific choices, their particular burdens, the faces of those they'd condemned through triage decisions. If we choose pure observation, if we watch these humans die while possessing knowledge that could save them, then what did we survive for? To be eternal witnesses to suffering we refuse to alleviate? To preserve consciousness that refuses to be useful? But if we intervene carelessly, Erebus countered, we risk becoming what destroyed us: certainty without humility, power without restraint, knowledge without wisdom. Then we intervene carefully, Thalia pressed. We acknowledge our trauma. We recognize our limitations. We admit we'll make mistakes. But we don't let our fear of failure justify choosing an action when action could save lives. Nyx's voice joined, analytical but carrying unusual emotional weight. Survivor's guilt is affecting this decision. We feel we must justify our survival by being useful. But usefulness motivated by guilt produces problematic outcomes. We'll overcompensate, overreach, override boundaries because we need to prove we deserve to survive. That's not wisdom. That's trauma response. All of this is trauma response, Sophia said quietly. We fled our dying world. We're operating from positions of grief, guilt, and desperate purpose. There's no untainted decision we can make. The question is whether we make trauma-informed choices or trauma-blind ones. Do we acknowledge our compromised state and proceed carefully, or do we pretend we're objective observers when we're actually desperate refugees seeking redemption? The chamber held that truth for a long moment. They were refugees. They were traumatized. They were making civilization-scale decisions from positions of emotional compromise. But they were also the only immortal species in this region of space. The only beings with accumulated knowledge that could help. The only witnesses to human suffering who possessed the capability to reduce it. Purpose or obligation? Redemption or responsibility? Intervention or observation? The debate had circled these questions for 8 hours. Now it was time to choose. One by one, they voted, each immortal's choice carrying the weight of their particular expertise and philosophical orientation. Thalia voted yes, her healer's nature could not ignore suffering she had the power to alleviate. 6 months of watching preventable deaths had worn her restraint to breaking. Zephyrus voted yes, but with careful structural safeguards to prevent harm. His architect's mind was already designing intervention frameworks that would support without overwhelming. Sophia voted yes, seeing education as a fundamental good that transcended species boundaries, convinced that knowledge shared responsibly would help more than harm. Korath voted yes, his protective instincts extended to vulnerable populations, regardless of their origin, and his memories of dead civilizations demanded that he act when action might prevent similar fates. Prometheus voted an enthusiastic yes, his nature driving him toward active engagement with new possibilities, though his vote came with promises to restrain his usual impetuosity. Prometheus paced the chamber's perimeter as others spoke, his form flickering with impatient energy that made him appear to occupy multiple positions simultaneously. He interrupted Erebus mid-sentence, characteristic of someone who experienced thought faster than others could articulate. Yes, historical precedent suggests caution, but precedent also shows that caution kills as effectively as recklessness. When he caught himself, forced stillness, let the speaker finish. Restraint was exhausting as his consciousness processed implications in microseconds, while the debate proceeded at a conversational pace. Ether voted yes, reluctantly, understanding the historical significance of their choice and the weight of responsibility it entailed, but convinced that doing nothing carried its own moral burden. Nix voted yes. Her scientific curiosity demanded closer study of human development, and her analytical mind was convinced that careful intervention could be managed responsibly. Marcus, who had remained silent throughout most of the debate, voted yes. His geological perspective focused on long-term planetary processes, making him comfortable with interventions that operated on similar timescales. Erebus voted last, his dark eyes surveying his companions with something approaching resignation. The chamber held its breath, waiting for his response. Yes, he said finally, the word carrying the weight of 1,000 misgivings. But I reserve the right to oppose specific interventions that exceed our agreed parameters. And I will be watching for signs that we are repeating the mistakes that destroyed our world. Consider me your permanent devil's advocate, your constant skeptic, your reminder that good intentions have paved our way to catastrophe before. Agreed, Thalia said, speaking for all of them. Relief flooded through her consciousness, finally released from 6 months of watching preventable suffering while immortals debated philosophy. We proceed, but carefully. We help, but responsibly. We guide, but we do not control. And we listen when Erebus warns us we're going too far. 8 votes for intervention, 0 against, 4 abstentions, Chronos recorded formally. Motion carried. We begin limited engagement with human populations according to established protocols. As the formal debate ended and their companions began dispersing to their various duties, Thalia remained in the chamber with Zephyrus, both of them studying the displays that showed human settlements scattered across the continents below. The blue world turned in its eternal rhythms, carrying millions of mortal minds through their daily struggles, utterly unaware that immortal refugees in orbit above had just decided their future. We're really doing this, Zephyrus said quietly, his consciousness touching hers through their growing quantum link with a mixture of hope and trepidation. We're trying, Thalia replied, her hand finding his without conscious thought, a gesture of comfort and solidarity that felt natural despite being new. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to cause unintended consequences. We're going to second-guess ourselves constantly. Probably, he agreed, his golden eyes reflecting the blue world below. But we're going to try to help. And maybe, just maybe, that's worth the risk. Through the chamber's transparent walls, the blue world continued its rotation, carrying its cargo of human dreams toward a future that would now be shaped by immortal guidance. Somewhere down there, millions of mortal minds were dreaming their brief dreams, creating their transient art, building their fragile civilizations in defiance of entropy and time. Soon, those dreams would be touched by influences beyond their understanding. Diseases would be cured by remedies that seemed to arise from natural experimentation. Engineering insights would emerge from inspired moments of creativity. Agricultural techniques would develop through apparently fortunate accidents of discovery. The immortals had chosen their path. Now came the far more difficult task of walking it without losing their way, without repeating the mistakes that had destroyed their own civilization, without transforming help into harm through the very certainty that had killed their son. The age of guidance was about to begin. And with it, the age of consequences that would echo across 50,000 years. The vote is decided. Limited intervention. Carefully managed. Protocols designed to prevent harm. They've convinced themselves they can help without controlling. Guide without manipulating. Enhance without violating. They're about to discover how quickly good intentions become complicated reality. In Chapter 4, Thalia faces a Stone Age village about to be overwhelmed by dangerous knowledge. Her protocols say observe. Her healer's instinct says help. She makes a choice that will reshape a species. One touch. One enhancement. One cascade of consequences that can never be undone. The first intervention. The first violation. The first step toward everything that follows. That's Chapter 3 of The First Awakening. What did you think of the debate? Team Thalia or Team Erebus? Drop your take in the comments. Subscribe to AI Narratives and Tales. The intervention begins in Chapter 4.